We're now going to start the main program with the recitation of Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قالت الأعراب آمنا قل لم تؤمنوا ولكن قولوا أسلمنا ولما يدخل الإيمان في قلوبكم وإن تطيعوا الله ورسوله لا يلتكم من أعمالكم شيئا إن الله غفور رحيم إنما المؤمنون الذين آمنوا بالله ورسوله ثم لم يرتابوا وجاهدوا بأموالهم وأنفسهم في سبيل الله أولئك هم الصادقون أتعلمون الله بدينكم والله يعلم ما في السماوات وما في الأرض والله بكل شيء عليم يمنون عليك أن أسلموا قل لا تمنوا علي إسلامكم بل الله يمن عليكم أن هداكم للإيمان إن كنتم صادقين إن الله يعلم غيب السماوات والأرض والله بصير بما تعملون صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Thank you very much. We are now very honored to have Kawther Abbas, who will be speaking to us on death and the power of regret. Let's welcome her. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Kawther is a GP by profession and also studies Hawza part-time at Al-Mahdi Institute. She's been teaching Quran and doing Islamic talks for around 20 years and is the co-founder of the Muslim Families Initiative, which runs programs targeted to children and their families. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين وصلوات الله وسلامه على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا وحبيبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد فقد قال الله في محكم كتابه المجيد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم كل نفس ذائقة الموت وإنما توفون أجوركم يوم القيامة فمن زحزح عن النار وأدخل الجنة فقد فاز وما الحياة الدنيا إلا متاع الغرور صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. So first of all, thank you very much to Mahfad Ali, Sikkim Salam Center. I don't know what you call yourself these days, for inviting me. It's always an honor to be on this side. I've grown up with much of the community here, and it's always a pleasure being here. Thank you to all the behind-the-scenes people. I know what that's like to be organizing these things week in, week out. It's a thankless task, but you all do it so seamlessly and wonderfully, so thank you. In the next few days, we'll be remembering Istishhad Imam al-Baqir, alayhi salam, our fifth Imam. And so I thought I would start with a ruwaya, a saying from him to get us into our topic. So this ruwaya goes, قيل للباقر, someone said للباقر عليه السلام, حدثني ما أنتفع به, tell me something that will benefit me. قال أكثر ذكر الموت فإنه لم يكثر ذكره إنسان إلا زهد في الدنيا. So increase your remembrance of death, and you do not increase remembrance of death except that you are able to abstain. I mean, zuhud is a really difficult word to properly explain from the world. Now, it's a bit strange. He's calling on us, or calling on the people of the time, to increase their remembrance of death. But if you think back to those times, they probably saw death all around them all the time. It wasn't like us, we're very kind of distant. When someone dies, they usually die in a hospital. We very rarely, see it. But they, people used to drop dead everywhere in their homes. They would be buried there and then. People would die very young. It was very common to lose children at a young age. So death was all around them, yet still, Imam al-Baqir says, increase your remembrance of death. And in fact, this is prevalent throughout our hadith, and even, going back to the Quran reminds us constantly, over and over again, of our mortality. Okay, كل من عليها فان. Everyone will meet their end. وَاعْبُدْ رَبَّكَ حَتَّى يَأْتِيَكَ الْيَقِينَ. Until certainty comes, until death comes. We are living in uncertain times. It's difficult times. Keep worshipping Allah until death comes. And it says you can't run away from it. أَيْنَمَا تَكُونُوا يُدْرِكْكُمُ الْمَوْتِ وَلَوْ كُنْتُمْ فِي بُرُوجٍ مُشَيَّدَةٍ. You might be in the strongest towers, building the biggest fortresses for yourself, but death will find you. An analogy maybe these days to our, we try to sort of live as healthy a life as we can. We've prolonged our lives, advancements in medicine. My job is to make you live as long as possible in the healthiest possible way. But I can say with certainty as a doctor that there is 100% mortality rate amongst, whoever's sitting here. So you try to put yourself into towers and fortify yourself against it. It will find you. Okay. إن الموت الذي تفرون منه فإنه ملاقيكم. You're trying to run away from it, and it's like trying to catch. It's always going to catch you. It's always going to bring you back. It's a certainty, and the Quran over and over again has to remind us of it. Now, I haven't told you anything that's rocket science. You're going to die, but we very rarely live our lives in that way, for maybe many reasons. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّهُمْ يَرَوْنَهُ بَعِيدًا وَنَرَاهُ قَرِيبًا. We see it as far. So as much as logic tells us we could die any moment, I could drop dead today, I could be hit by a bus, I don't live that way. And part of it is preservation of life. We don't want to be we don't want to be going into dangerous situations. We're trying to preserve our life. That's a human instinct. A little child might run into a burning building or run across the street or whatever. We have a little bit more sense, and that's part of our inbuilt human nature. So we try to avoid or avert death, and that's fine. But what we do in the process is create such a distance from it that we no longer see our life in terms of our death. And the other thing, obviously, that keeps us from remembering death is the fact that 90% of our time we are, living in our subconscious. We are in routine. We are in autopilot. We are living in here, not in the world. We are thinking and trying to make stories about the world instead of actually living in it. And therefore, it's just not at the forefront of our consciousness. And therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has to keep reminding us time and time again. It's not an Islamic concept only. By all means, if you go back to the ancient Romans, you go back to the first Hellenic philosophers, the Stoics, they had this concept called memento mori. You may have heard of before, and it was something that they used to inscribe in everything. So you had these massive, people like Marcus Aurelius, who is a big emperor, a Stoic philosopher later on. They may have had conquests and defeated big people, but they kept having to remind themselves that you are going to die. And it's depicted in artwork, it's depicted in their coffins. It then went on to a Christian concept. So you go to some European churches and you see skulls, and so it's like a constant reminder etched. And people then felt, and till this day feel, that they need to practice remembering death constantly. What's the point? What are the benefits? Well, it's kind of obvious, but when you remember death, you are giving more importance to your life. You are putting things in perspective. You are living the moment. You are being thankful. You are averting yourselves from the pleasures. There's lots of hadith that says "Uthkuru hadim al-ladhat," the destroyer of all pleasures, and that's death. So there's obviously many benefits to it. But when I mentioned that I'm going to talk about death, and I mentioned it to a few people, they were like, that's a bit dark. It's a bit, morbid. Why would you be sitting here talking about death? And because we live in a society which very much values positivity, longevity, youth, we're making ourselves look younger than ever before, feel younger than ever before. The idea of remembering death feels very depressing. And that's how it's depicted. You Google death as an image, and what you're seeing is the Grim Reaper, and you're seeing the skulls, and you're seeing black, and you're seeing quite a miserable kind of case for death. So when you start talking about it, people think, well, that's just a bit too heavy for me. I'm just going to, I'm going to push it to the back of my mind, and that's what we do. And the other reason we think that remembering death is a bit strange is that we think that it will probably make us depressed, because if you're sitting there remembering death all the time, what would be the point of living? Like, you'd think this life is pointless, really. So what should be our relationship with death? Obviously Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, and later on Ayatollah Fayyad al-Kashani. They've both written very similar books. Al-Ghazali wrote Ihya Ulum al-Din, and then Fayyad al-Kashani went on to write Haqa'iq fi Mahasin al-Akhlaq, and both of them have a chapter on remembrance of death. And they describe people falling into 4 categories when it comes to remembrance of death. So they say 3, but it's actually really 4. So the first one is those who are enamored in this life. So they take great pleasure in this life. They're gathering all their wealth, and they're amassing their degrees, and they're loving it so much that they fear death. And this is sort of seen as the lowest level. Those who just are just fearful of death. A lot of us fear death. Ironically, so much so that we don't live our lives because we're fearing dying so much, that we're sort of in this anxious state of fearing that we don't live our lives. So that is the lowest level it's seen. The next one is level of the repenters, they call it. Level of the repenters is those people that are mu'mineen, that are always in remembrance of God, but always feel that they're falling so short that they also fear death. Not because they want the pleasures of this life, but because they think they're not ready. They're never ready. They won't be ready. And I think a lot of maybe Muslimin probably fall into that category. They say there's no blame on this category. It's a very sincere category. But this is what people are afraid of, that if you think about death all the time, you'll be so scared of being there. And I think traditionally our lectures have all centered around how scary death is, how scary the grave is, how frightening barzakh is. There's like a real morbid fascination in our communities about this. You get asked so many questions. What are we going to look like in Yawm al-Qiyamah? What form will we take? Will the food be real food? Like, it's almost like we've created this sort of very fantasy Lord of the Rings type world in our head, and it's quite scary. It's quite scary. So, of course, you'd be like scared if that was what you were thinking about. But yes, you do get a little bit of fear that you haven't done enough, and that's fine. But these people are enamored in this fear. The third level is the level of the Gnostics, the Urafa. These are those who yearn for death. They love to die and meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This world is not very much to them. They live in it, they survive in it, and they function in it and at a high level, but they want to meet death. But the fourth and the greatest level is seen as that of rida, of contentment. So no matter what happens, death comes, death doesn't come. You live, you die. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's plan is what you are pleased with at the end of the day. And this is the highest level. This is what we're all aiming to achieve. That we are so entrusting in Allah. We have reached such a level that what Allah has planned for us, we are happy with. So remembrance of death, the end point is not to be so disgusted with the world necessarily that you don't want to live in it anymore, or so fearful of the next day that that you're just living in fear all the time. The end point is to get to a point where you accept it as what it is and you are happy with what Allah plans for you. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So one of the ways that we can learn from those who are dying is to there's a lot of books these days written by palliative consultants and people that have worked with patients towards the end of their life, and they're usually along the lines of regrets. What do they regret? And the aim behind these kind of things is to try to understand what it is that matters in life, because obviously, like I said, we're so much in a rush and so much in our routine and so much set in how we do things that it's very rare for us to be able to see the bigger picture and see the perspective of our lives. And so it's always very interesting to go back to these books. There are some really good ones. There's a lady called Bronnie Ware who wrote a book called 5 Regrets of the Dying, which people may have heard of. It was quite famous at the time. She was Australian. She worked in a palliative care facility. And what she did is she sort of realized that there were 5 regrets that sort of kept coming up. Okay, things like working less, things like keeping in touch with friends, things like living true to yourself, like expressing your feelings more often. These kind of things, they came up. There's also a really good book called With the End in Mind by a lady called Catherine Mannix, who's kind of similar. She's a palliative care consultant. So I decided to look into the Quran and look at the top regrets of not necessarily the dying, but those who have died, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us an insight actually as to the regrets of the dead. And it's interesting because there are definitely common themes, and I'll share 3 specific themes with you today. So the first one is in Surah Al-Furqan. Okay, the ayah it goes, وَيَوْمَ يَعَضُّ الظَّالِمُ عَلَى يَدَيْهِ. So the zalim, the oppressor, the wrongdoer, is biting on his hands, you know, like, I don't know, you can imagine, when someone's like, I don't know if other cultures do it, but definitely Arabs do it, it's like this kind of biting, just full of regret on that day. يَعَضُّ الظَّالِمُ عَلَى يَدَيْهِ يَقُولُ يَا لَيْتَنِي اتَّخَذْتُ مَعَ الرَّسُولِ سَبِيلًا يَا وَيْلَتَى لَيْتَنِي لَمْ أَتَّخِذْ فُلَانًا خَلِيلًا. So this person on the Day of Judgment says, I wish I had taken the path of the Prophet. Oh, woe to me, like double woe. Ya waylata laytani, like not just ya waylata or ya laytani, ya waylata laytani, like woe to me, double woe, that I took this person as my close friend. Fulanan khalila. So this is a major regret. We are obviously social beings. We thrive on other people, or we get put down by other people. And as much as we think we are immune, but whoever we surround ourselves by will often shape who we become and the person we are. This person double regrets that they took this particular really close friend, and that person led them to destruction at the end of the day. They wish they had taken the true path, which was the path of the Prophet. Obviously, this can be extrapolated if you've got an imagination to many things, but at the end of the day, we are only ever accountable for our own selves. We can never blame anyone else, not the scholars, not the speakers, not the friends, whoever we've taken as our confidant on earth. Okay, we can't blame them on Yawm al-Qiyamah. And the only true way is the way of the Prophet. And so even sometimes when the tide is trying to push us this way and that way, and what we perceive as the common, way that religion is practiced or Shi'ism is practiced, maybe pushing us this way and that way, at the end of the day, the sabil of the Prophet is the only way. And that's a great reminder. The second regretful ayah comes in Surah Al-Munafiqun at the end. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وأنفقوا مما رزقناكم من قبل أن يأتي أحدكم الموت فيقول ربي لولا أخرتني إلى أجل قريب لأصدق وأكن من الصالحين. So on that day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first starts by saying أنفقوا مما رزقناكم, give of what I have given you. Keep giving, keep giving, keep giving. Until there comes a day when one of you will come, when death will come, and they say, please, Ya Rab, just delay it for me a little bit, just a little bit, إلى أجل قريب, so that I can give more sadaqah and I can أكون من الصالحين. So, as much as we may give in this life of our money, of our wealth, of our time, and some people do this amazingly well, it can never be enough because it's not ours in the first place. And these days, everyone with their standing orders of of nafaqa is great, but there isn't like maybe the same intentionality behind it. It's become such a routine. There is a great hikmah in nafaqa, and obviously, you know, I can use this to plug this out. There is so many ayat about this, but it's one of the greatest regrets in Yawm al-Qiyamah is that they didn't give enough. They had and they didn't give enough. And your greatest commodity is you and your time and yourself. And number 3, and this is the most common theme, okay? Surah Al-Mu'minun, حتى إذا جاء أحدكم الموت قال رب ارجعون. So they come to the end of their life, they go, again, please take me back. They're like pleading with Allah, please take me back. لعلي أعمل صالحا فيما تركت. So that I can do العمل الصالح, the good deeds, we say. I'll explain what I think عمل الصالح is. Elsewhere in Surah Al-Sajdah, it says, وَلَوْ تَرَى إِذَا الظَّالِمُونَ نَاكِسُوا رُؤُوسِهِم. You see the ظالمون with their faces bowed down. عند ربهم ربنا أبصرنا وسمعنا. On that day they say, I can see now and I can hear. You know, they say بصرك اليوم حديد. On that day, suddenly all the veils are lifted and you can see the reality, and they say فارجعنا نعمل صالحا. Just please take us back so that we can, you know, do العمل الصالح. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says it's too late. You had your chance. And actually, Allah knows our nature better than anyone else. He says, if you go back, you would be doing the same thing. So the biggest regret is that we didn't do more in terms of deeds. And when you try to look in the Quran, what does al-amal al-salih mean? You see iman and amal al-salih coupled, you know, together. Iman is our belief. Iman is our salah. Iman is what is our internal relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it's always coupled with what we are doing externally, i.e. what we are doing on a societal level, i.e. what we are doing for others. This is al-amal al-salih, you know. And these people, they realize once the veils are lifted and they can just taste death that they didn't do enough. And this is really the biggest lesson, the biggest regret that you see in the Quran. Regrets are very uncomfortable emotions. We all have them. And I'm speaking to, alhamdulillah, an audience that's lived a few years, so it's always much easier to talk about regret. Because obviously they increase as you get older. It's this feeling and this emotion inside of you that's like a sinking feeling where you felt you made the wrong decision. Where if you'd made a different decision, things may have been different. So it's more than a mistake. It's like eats away at you. And the reason we don't like the emotion of regret is that it's uncomfortable, you know, and we talked about the positivity of society. You know, it's very difficult to live with sort of negative emotions. But also because we tend to, when we do tend to regret, we can wallow in the regret. We can sort of live in that regret and become quite depressed in the regret, and it can all consume us, and then we feel crippled by the regret. The other thing we tend to do is sort of have this no regrets attitude. You know, I've done it, I made mistakes, I've lived my life, YOLO, you know, and that's a general societal, again, push, no regrets kind of attitude. But I think what we need to do is somewhere in between. And there's a really good book called The Power of Regret by someone called Daniel Pink, which collates the regret of thousands of people from all over the world. And what he noticed is he noticed trends. He calls it the power of regret because he feels that you don't have to wallow in your regret, nor do you have to ignore it and push it to the back, but you have to feel it, understand it, and see what you can learn from it. Now, some regrets are unfixable. If someone has passed away and you regret not spending enough time with them, you can't ever go back. That's a horrible feeling. But one of the things that comes about in the research by Daniel Pink is that inaction regrets vastly outweigh action regrets. So if I regret doing something, I went into a venture and it failed, or I got married and it didn't work out, they are far outnumbered by the feeling that people get that they didn't do something when the opportunity came. And this is obviously mirrored in the regrets of those who have died, bil Quran, is that it's the action, it's what you could have done in the moment that really gnaws and eats away at you. It's that feeling that, this was a golden opportunity and I didn't do it. He categorizes them into 4 categories. I don't know if we've got time, but we probably can go through that another day. But one of the major regrets is connection regrets. I didn't connect more with those people that I loved. I didn't appreciate them enough. I didn't say to them enough, I love you, these kind of things. So again, that comes back to maybe the first ayah we mentioned about the fact that your life and your relationships determine not only the quality of your life, but also the quality of your death and the afterlife as well. So the themes that come about are that we as human beings will all regret, but what we can do is harness the power of these regrets, think on them, reflect on them, and if we can't remedy them, at least make sure that going forward we have learned from them and we can do something about them. The greatest gift we've been given is the fact we're still alive. We're not reached those stages where like those people we read in the Quran yet. So we have our regrets. We wish we could do more. But now is the time to act. Because memento mori, remember death, it can happen any time. And it's this kind of practice that we need to be inculcating. So to end, let's be practical a little bit, because I really don't like theory only. And I'm going to give you some ways maybe we can start to incorporate the remembrance of death into our lives. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So the first, obviously, is to be more in touch with death, i.e. visit the graveyards more. I mean, the Khawajas are much better at this than Iraqis. Like, in the Iraq community, there are people that probably haven't visited a graveyard because, partly because a lot of our loved ones are not buried here. And partly because there's a little bit of a cultural thing. I don't know, you could tell me about other cultures where, it's a little bit, morbid to visit the graveyard. But it is all over our riwayat to keep visiting the graves. And maybe you do, but maybe you only do it on certain occasions like Ashura or Eid or these kind of things. The more you can do it, the better. And if you do it because you go and visit a loved one, then vary it a bit. There's riwayat that say go and look at the gravestones and look at how they lived and imagine how long they lived and what their lives were like. They were like you once upon a time with all the same worries, with all the same concerns. So, go and see other graves. Don't just visit the Muslim graves. Go to the graves near your house, the graveyards near your house, and have a look. We've got a beautiful graveyard near us in Harrow on the Hill, walking distance, which has got very, very old graves, hundreds of years old. It's just amazing to think, how alive these people once were and how we will end up. Take your children to the graveyard as much as possible, not only to visit their loved ones, but to also feel the presence of these people and the souls. Go to funerals, go to fawatih. Some of my biggest regrets personally have been not attending a fatiha of someone because I was busy that day, Maybe we only go to those people we know really well. I don't know that person really well. I don't need to go. I'm absolved of that duty. But the more you go and then imagine yourself in that position, the more, again, it brings it to your consciousness. There are, like I said, even like the non-Muslims find ways. There's people that carry these coins, memento mori coins, that remind them of death with skulls and things like that. You can inscribe somewhere, you will die. It sounds really morbid, but the more you remind yourself of it, the more it can stay in your consciousness. It's a muscle to be exercised. Yeah, you don't want to remember it only sporadically, every now and again. You want to be remembering it, ideally daily. So, and obviously be involved in ghusl if you're not already, and if you can, it's a wajib kifai, it's wajib on the community. Again, we are light years behind in the Iraqi community. Hopefully we're trying to remedy that, but we are light years behind in terms of being involved in ghusl, having our own ghusl khana and things like that. So that's number one. Number two, we have to talk about it more. What do I mean? From many angles. I mean, obviously these days there's a lot of will writing things, so make sure you write your will. Obviously have your kafan ready and things like that. But we have to be able to be a little bit more desensitized to talking about it, especially as we get older, as our parents get older, as we near towards the end of life. We are quite behind as a community, as a Muslim community, in talking about end-of-life care. You know, when you work in non-Muslim settings and you see all the care planning that goes into trying to give people as comfortable an end of life as possible, or lasting powers of attorney or things like that, people are just too scared to jinx their life by talking about it. But there's a great value in not only desensitizing you, but just preparing you. There's so many conversations that we need to have as communities about when is the end of life. This is louder. This is something that is all in the domain of the fuqaha and jurisprudence at the moment, but it is ethical, it's philosophical, it's medical. When is death? Is it brain death? Is it heart death? We need to talk about these things more, so that we're not like always perpetually maybe going to be that community that clings on to life no matter what, because somebody is on a life support machine, even if they're brain dead. But we are always going to, is that our role? This is the conversations we need to have. DNARs, where do they come in? Do not resuscitate. People are terrified. Organ donation. We've been talking about some of these things, but a lot of people haven't even thought about whether they want to be organ donors or not. Like, we need to be talking more. And we need to be talking to our children about it in an age-appropriate way earlier on. So it doesn't seem like this really scary, horrible thing that's going to happen. My son's not here, but he's been hearing about death a lot in the last few days. I think, Mom, just stop talking about the fact that we're going to die. But you don't have to do it in your face, but you just have to do it more often. We have to have these conversations. Number 3, so like I said, most of the time we're on a hamster wheel in terms of our life, in terms of our time. It's really interesting because we're busier than ever as a society. We feel very time deprived. However, we've made so many shortcuts for ourselves. Nowadays you don't have to leave the house to go shopping or cook to have food delivered to you. You don't even have to leave your seat to switch the light off anymore. When you listen to a voice message, you can double the sound. YouTube videos at like 1x speed is a thing of the past. We're trying to find all these ways to cut corners, but we feel so deprived of time so often. Running around, busying ourselves for what? When we remember death, we are remembering that our biggest commodity is time, and it's time to prioritize. It's time to have a think about, so imagine we always do this thing, imagine yourself going to die next week or whatever. You've imagined that already. You might have one day imagined you going to a doctor's office and finding out that you're going to die, or you've got cancer, irretractable cancer. You are dying now. You are dying. You're all dying. Sorry to be morbid, but you are dying. So how is your life prioritized in such a way that you live it knowing you are dying? Are you still doing all of the stuff, the little bits and pieces that you feel obliged to do because other people expect it from you? Are you still wasting time away? I'm not saying like you're going to become these super efficient people that are like doing all these wonderful things, but there's so much you could do with this wonderful commodity. Number 5, I don't know where I am. Number 5, maybe, is this connection regret. Really be purposeful about A, who you spend your time with, and B, find a language that you can express to your loved ones how much you love them in a better way. Don't wait for them to be terminally ill or get Alzheimer's or die before you appreciate them and express that love to them. In certain cultures, especially ours, we're not very good, especially the older generation, at being expressive with feelings, especially the men, sorry. But it's breaking a lot of things that maybe are really difficult to you. For me to be able to say to my dad, I love you, it's not an easy thing to do, but if you don't start doing it now, then you'll regret it. There's a quote from a Stoic philosopher, I can't remember which one, where he says every night before, when he kissed his children to bed, he would imagine that they would die that night, which probably happened at that time. So it's like again, a bit dark, but it's the reality of things. And so every interaction and every kiss and every hug and every I love you, treat it like it's the last one, especially when you go to sleep. Make sure you've sort of evened all the things. They say you die when you go to sleep and you're resurrected in the morning, kind of thing. So be intentional about how you express yourself and how you connect to everyone around you. And lastly, when it comes to the amal al-salih, I guess the question you need to ask yourself is this world a better place for me having been in it? If I died right now, what would people remember me as, and what would be my legacy? What's my sadaqah jariyah? What's my gift to the world? It's not mine. It was always Allah's to give, but I'm the vessel through which I gave it. And what is it going to be? And can I do more? And am I in such a routine as to work and come home and be exhausted? Or am I going to be a bit more intentional about carving out some time to do something to give back to the wider society, the wider community, the world out there, whether it's my community or whether it's those around us. And finally, remember that all of this that we're doing, it might make sense to you, and you might say, yes, I need to do this and that. But at the end of the day, it's hard. It's hard to keep up that level of consciousness. Don't forget that the missing factor may be when you're trying really hard to do these things and the projects and change yourself, the missing factor might be the fact that you think that you are doing any of it, because you are not. It is only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that shapes our destinies. And all we can do is free ourselves of ourselves in order for him to act through us, to find a way to use death to make our living more significant. And so that when we, inshallah, cross into the next world, which we all will, just to remind you in case you didn't remember, that we won't regret. Or we won't regret big anyway, inshallah. وصلوا على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين.
Thank you very much. We have just over 10 minutes for any questions, if there are any, before Maghrib time.
Assalamu
alaikum.
I enjoyed that very much. The question really is, how do we achieve that state of rida that you were talking about? That seems very remote.
Yes.
Any practical tips in how to be?
Oh God, how long do we have? We have all the tools in our armory because we've been given all of the means through the recitation of the Quran and our salah and our ibadah and things like that. But I think, like I said, I think sometimes the key is really our lack of consciousness. Nobody here doesn't have the intentionality behind it, or doesn't have the want and the desire to do all of these things and be all of these things. But we are so much in the level of our mind that we are always trying to problem solve. We're always trying to as soon as something happens, we're just okay, right? Let's be the rational person. Our rational faculty is there for a reason. We need it. I'm not saying absolve yourself from it, but rida is the stage above tawakkul, and it's the stage where you feel Allah acting through you. So at the moment you won't be in that state. I mean, you may be, mashallah, but you may find glimpses of it. You may be able to recollect in your life bits of it where you kind of reach a point, and it's usually at your lowest point where you're I have nowhere to, I don't know what to do. I have tried everything, because we try to problem solve and find our way, and it's at that lowest depths where you kind of realize, gosh, I have no power in any of this. Okay, which is the gift of trials, really. And that's when. And it's at that point of surrender that you may find the rida you're looking for. How do you work on that state? By working on your consciousness. How do you do that? By making more time. Just slow down your life and make more time for reflection through all the means ways. I mean, we can do a whole lecture on it. So, I wish I had the magic answer for you, but it's not something that you don't know already. And it may be something that you felt at some point, so you just have to tap into that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You said we do not communicate with our spouses or parents or next of kin or children about love. But at the same time, I think we are also failing in talking about death, spouse to spouse, child to parents. And I think that itself is very therapeutic, I think. And I think, I just wonder what your feelings are. Is it just us as Muslims, or do you think it spans across other cultures as well? What is the experience? Do other cultures, do they talk more about death or less about death?
I mean, you've obviously, Dr. Nizar, experienced a lot of other cultures as well. Obviously, I've had these conversations with many different types of people, and I used to work in an area which was, there were no Muslims in the area I used to work. I used to have a lot of these conversations, and yes, there was some discomfort about it, but I do find them a little bit more, maybe it's a British thing, where they're a little bit more, like, I don't know, bleak, and they don't mind talking about stuff like this, but there's much more of an acceptance. It's seeped into their culture much quicker than it did into ours, and that's why when I have the conversation, and we used to live in, I was speaking to a lovely ITU doctor, and you have these conversations about end of life care and what do we do and things like that. There is just a little bit more kind of ability to be level-headed and talk about these subjects in those matters of crisis, probably because they've either given it a thought, or maybe that's just their disposition, or maybe they're just ahead of us as a culture. I don't know about the Hawza culture. We are terrible Iraqis at talking about this. Like, the first thing you do is you might mention to your parents, or we might die, like they'd be like shutting it down straight away, Smallah, don't say that. And the problem with that is when we're faced with it, and when we do get there, or if someone unexpectedly passed away, I don't know, I have no idea what they wanted in terms of their burial. I don't know what they desired in terms of like their funeral arrangements or anything, because we've never even broached the subject. Or someone, la samahallah, gets into an accident and they're brain dead, and they're suddenly having to make all these decisions on their behalf, having never discussed it, even though you are so close to this person and you think you know them better than anyone else, but you've never literally discussed it. And so we definitely have to have these conversations. They are harder when it's our loved one, because the thought of it is just horrible. But we need to become more desensitized, and we can do that more easily if we are well and we are healthier, and we're not having to make those imminent decisions now to talk about it, at least in an abstract way, and then close to the time, make more concrete decisions. Know about each other's wills. What is it you want? What is it you're leaving? What. Even like what you leaving behind in terms of your wajibat, in the will you're supposed to write down your debts and your things like this and all of this. Like, just knowing each other in terms of what would I do if you died is very, very valuable to do. And I feel we're behind. I don't know what you feel.
The will.
Yes.
What about the living will?
Yes,
advanced
exactly.
directive.
Exactly.
How many of us actually have got the written down?
Yeah, I would guess very, very few. I mean, around COVID, we started advanced planning. You probably remember it came into Kawther. You started doing it, you have to do it, and you had to ask quite difficult questions. Where would you like to die? Where would you like to be at the place of death? And things like this. And people did find it a little bit uncomfortable, even the English population, the white population, mainly because they thought we were trying to get rid of them and kill them at the time of COVID or something. But a lot of people are accepting. We have never asked those questions to each other. So yeah, definitely.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Thank you very much. It was a fantastic talk. We have also a category of people that they overthink about death, and that cause anxiety.
Yes.
So I think you are GP. Perhaps you have had some
every day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So do you think that we have just a one-size-fits-all solution for everyone, or we have to just see case by case that how much people should think about death?
obviously some people are naturally more warriors. Their thoughts are, some people have busy minds and are natural warriors and are pessimistic. And so you mentioned death and they go to the worst case scenarios, and that's just how their psychology works. So maybe a different approach. I don't think it means that we should never talk about it with them. I think that if they're going to be anxious, they're going to be anxious actually anyway. I think talking about it actually could reduce anxiety, because it's usually the fear of the unknown and the fear of the lack of control that people fear about death or illness. But like I said, that I say every day, because the majority of people's physical ailments are intertwined with their psychological state and their upbringing and their cognitive, everything, their spiritual state. And there are so many people that are health anxious and will feel everything and anything in their body. And obviously, ultimately, what they're fearing might be death, but really what they're fearing is probably lack of control and lack of say and all of that. And so I think making it more something we talk about in society can bring back the control for those people, can demystify, de-escalate their fears, and maybe changing our narrative as Muslims when we talk about death a little bit, to where it's not just all about like the horror of it, might help as well. Alaikum salam.
Good being said. Sorry. So a couple of things. We talked about difference between cultures.
Yeah.
In regards with talking about death. Mm-hmm. And I think this might be linked to something much, much deeper around our education and teaching to our children and what we say on member, etc., etc.
Yeah.
We always try to show or mention the stick side of God rather than the carrot. So always about the horror, or always about the hell. Yeah. If you think for a moment about like Christianity, for example, or atheism, even better, they think like there is nothing, or Christianity all about love, heaven is so easy to reach. So that makes a huge difference. And that's what we need to kind of improve upon.
Yeah.
So teaching, we always need to show the love side of God. How actually God is merciful. Yes, Shadid al-Aqab, we all agree, but where is the mercy? Where is the Rahman, al-Rahim? This is so deep that it scares so many people away from death.
Yes.
And also to the point that brother he mentioned, there's a very close line between being suicidal and thinking about death. So sometimes thinking about death, it could actually help you to face pressures. But if you think about it in terms of running away from problem, so this is suicidal. Yes. So we need to kind of, discuss this deeper.
Yes.
In a way.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few more speakers nowadays that are talking about the love of God. But they are always they're always told that we're too skewed now towards love, like you have to have like this balance. But I don't believe that, because I don't believe that anyone can ever really truly love anyone out of fear or worship anyone out of fear. It's not a real, if you fear your father, you'll do everything and you'll obey them, but that won't be any kind of out of your own volition. And I don't think that knowing that Allah is all merciful and all loving would ever mean that those people that want to disobey Him would be more likely to do so because they think He's all loving. They will much more likely go towards Him, because who doesn't want a loving God? And obviously He leads every single surah with, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And so He's reminding us constantly, that is what He leads with, His rahmah. In terms of suicidality, it's difficult because, yes, those people are thinking about death, but it's usually because they can't stand the pain of being alive anymore, and it's different. We try to get to a point where we think about death in such a way that it gives meaning to our life and makes our life more, allows us to live our life in a better way. People that have reached that low point, unfortunately, can't see any way out of their pain other than to end their life. And so it is a slightly different place that they are from where we are aspiring to be when we are talking more openly about our mortality. and that sometimes comes in the vacuum again of not talking enough about death, that people think, I don't know, that this is the solution to all their issues.
Just a quick comment. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for your talk. You know, when we talk about narratives around death, and you know, you talked about how it is always considered extremely scary. I sometimes think that it is considered scary because of the loneliness associated with it.
Yes.
That you're going to be on your own. But somehow God never features in that conversation. That just because you die does not mean God is not there. And if God is there, then surely that's enough.
Yes.
So I question these narratives, and I question the lack of God in these narratives and the presence of the Almighty beyond this life.
Yes.
And I feel like that there's not enough spoken about that. We talk about this loneliness, we talk about the terror.
Because people are taking it out of a context. So, for example, say in Dua Abu Hamza Thamali, there is things about the loneliness of the grave and what do I do and things like that. But it's in the context, a huge context of all about connection with God at the end of the day. There is always a little bit of fear that you haven't done enough, that what if I won't reach the merciful God, and maybe that's where this fear comes from in the grave. But yes, you can never be lonely. Not truly, if you have Allah with you. And actually, we read a lot in the ahadith and in the ayat Qur'aniya about the social nature of al-akhirah as well. You know, yes, there are people يَوْمَ يَفِرُّ الْمَرْءُ مِنْ أَخِيهِ وَأُمِّهِ وَأَبِيهِ, but there are also people that are together in ummahs with their prophets, with their imams. We are communal beings, and if we've chosen a life, if we've gone that path, yes, and the Yawm al-Qiyamah might be scary, might be alone, but actually if we found our mu'mineen tribe here, or we have that connection in our heart, we'll be able to recognize the other mu'mineen, and I think that it will be a much less lonely place than we think it is.
Final quick question, very, very quick.
Thank you, Doctor. You touched on an important subject as part of this whole thing.
Yes.
The whole thing is very important, of course. But about death is the transition as opposed to an end of life.
Yes.
And I think if we think about it as a transition, it's more around the preparation for that next part. You know, we spend our lives, building big houses and traveling and all this.
Absolutely.
Well, how much of it is dedicated to that other house and the other? I think that makes it a lot less morbid and actually much more doable.
Yes. I mean, in the Quran it says, وَيَوْمَ يَحْشُرُهُمْ كَأَنْ لَمْ يَلْبَثُوا إِلَّا سَاعَةً مِنَ النَّهَارِ. When we are when we are in the other life, we look back at life and we'll see it as if it's like an hour of our lives. Literally, we lived for an hour on this earth. And actually, for those of us as we get older, become nostalgic, look back, it does feel very, very quick. Where's the time gone and how have we reached this point? And yes, so if we see it as it literally is just a mata', or it's just a passage to another life, then yes, it gives more meaning to it. And so and it gives us a lot of hope, because death is not finality for us, whereas for others it may be.
Thank you so much for the talk today and for the questions for everyone. It is now Maghrib time, so we'll be finishing, if that's okay. Salat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Quickly, please, can any parents who have children next door, please can you collect your children before Maghrib? Please can you collect your children before Maghrib so that the volunteers can inshallah join the prayers? Sorry? Yes, please, now is Maghrib. Yes, please collect the children now. Yeah, before Maghrib.